Hey there, welcome to the Jewish Adulting Podcast. Thank you for joining me today on your adulting journey. Before we get started, can you do me a quick favor? Can you hit the like and subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to this? I promise it's not a lifetime commitment, but when you don't subscribe, it's kind of like coffee without caffeine. What are we even doing here? Or like latkes without applesauce? Are we even living our best life? When you subscribe, you not only give me warm, fuzzy feelings, but you're also helping me bring amazing guests who rely on subscriber counts to know whether joining me is a worthy endeavor. More subscribers mean more epic conversations for you. And hey, if you're feeling extra generous, you can also show your support by becoming a monthly supporter at buymeacoffee.com/Jewish adulting. Whether it's $1, $5, $10, or even $20, every little bit helps make this podcast rolling. Of course, if you're sitting on a cool million or even looking to sponsor the show, reach out to me at jewishadulting@gmail.com. Also, I'm always looking out for engaging, thoughtful, passionate guests to join me. So if you want to nominate someone or want to come on the podcast yourself, reach out. Let's make a podcast shidduch.
This is Rabbi Ben-Zion Schaefer of the Shmooze.com. Jewish adulting is about shining a light on parts of ourselves in order to do Avodas Hashem with all the tools and resources at our disposal. It is an honor and a privilege to have every day to further refine our character and grow closer to Hashem. Take advantage of these opportunities before it's too late.
Hey there, welcome to the Jewish Adulting Podcast. Thank you for joining me today on your adulting journey. Before we get started, can you do me a quick favor? Can you hit the like and subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to this? I promise it's not a lifetime commitment, but when you don't subscribe, it's kind of like coffee without caffeine. What are we even doing here? Or like latkes without applesauce? Are we even living our best life? When you subscribe, you not only give me warm, fuzzy feelings, but you're also helping me bring amazing guests who rely on subscriber counts to know whether joining me is a worthy endeavor. More subscribers mean more epic conversations for you. And hey, if you're feeling extra generous, you can also show your support by becoming a monthly supporter at buymeacoffee.com/Jewish adulting. Whether it's $1, $5, $10, or even $20, every little bit helps make this podcast rolling. Of course, if you're sitting on a cool million or even looking to sponsor the show, reach out to me at jewishadulting@gmail.com. Also, I'm always looking out for engaging, thoughtful, passionate guests to join me. So if you want to nominate someone or want to come on the podcast yourself, reach out. Let's make a podcast shidduch.
This is Rabbi Ben-Zion Schaefer of the Shmooze.com. Jewish adulting is about shining a light on parts of ourselves in order to do Avodas Hashem with all the tools and resources at our disposal. It is an honor and a privilege to have every day to further refine our character and grow closer to Hashem. Take advantage of these opportunities.
Hello, everybody. This is your host of the Jewish Adulting Podcast. I'm here today with Rena Reiser, who is a somatic practitioner, and she will be explaining to us what that means for those of us who are not in the know. But Rena, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be a somatic practitioner?
Sure. Estelle, thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I love the name. Really resonates with me.
Yes.
So how did I get here? It's a long story. We can probably spend a few hours on it. I would say that it really started with my own journey. I would say that the turning point for me was when I had a 1-year-old baby and I got diagnosed with mono. And my doctor told me that I would probably be sick for 6 months. And when my doctor told me that, I thought, that's crazy. I have a 1-year-old. How am I supposed to be sick for the next 6 months? I mean, I had like a low-grade fever. It was hard for me to go from the couch to my bedroom kind of thing. Like I was just really had no energy.
Right.
And I thought, wow, this is just not sustainable. I need to do something about this. And my husband had been trying to get me to read Dr. Sarno's book. And Dr. Sarno, the pain doctor, had been trying to get me to read his book for a while because I suffered from migraines and from back pains. And I thought it was all kind of crazy because I was somebody who was very much in my left brain. I loved math. I loved science. At the time, I was a programmer. And things had to make sense logically. 1 + 1 had to equal 2, had to be backed up by studies, by science, none of this quackery stuff. But when
none of this touchy-feely.
Yeah. When my doctor told me that I might be sick could be 6 months, I was like, okay, I'm desperate. Let's see if there's something to this. So I went to the book that my husband had got me And I looked in the index to see if he spoke about mono. And sure enough, he did. He had one page on mono. I read what he had to say about it, and I thought, okay, this is really interesting. Let's see if I could do this. So I skimmed through the book and learned the basics of his process, and which is basically, essentially, he says that chronic pain or physical pain that a person has, and even some illnesses that a person has, comes as a result of a person repressing rage that they have within them. And if they can express the rage and feel it, then they'll start to feel better. So I was like, oh, I'm not an angry person. Me, no, perfect me-dos, me.
All right. All right.
Well, me, what could I possibly be reading against?
This book is obviously not for you.
Right.
Okay.
So I thought about it, and there was actually a work situation at the time where my coworker at the time had done something that really, really upset me. And when I was able to identify that and express my anger, not to her, not to anyone else, but just really expressing my anger and really starting to feel it, my fever broke the next day. And once I saw that, I thought, whoa, there's something to this. Now, it took a while to get from my fever breaking until getting back my full energy. But even just seeing that my fever broke and that all of a sudden I could move more than from the couch to my bedroom, I thought there was something to this. And it really opened up my eyes and my mind to this other way of doing things. And
it sounds like you have the gift of desperation, right?
Yeah.
Like where you're so desperate, you're willing to try anything. And in a way, sometimes
Right.
that often brings us to where we need to be.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Although the truth is that over the years, I can't say that I jumped full force into it. It definitely took a while until I was able to say, okay, I'm totally on board with this way of doing things. And it also took trying lots of other things that nowadays I think are really nice and can supplement a person's journey. But to me, they're not the main part of what I'm so passionate about nowadays. But I would say that's where I started. And over time, things really started to shift.
Okay. So you got into, first of all, just to tell you that when I was growing up, my mother was really into Louisa Hay, and we had the book. I remember it had like a rainbow cover on it, and whenever we had a symptom, she would pull open the book and be like, "This is because you feel stuck in your life," or like your nosebleed is because you feel like you're out of oxygen. I don't know. I don't remember, honestly. And I remember just like rolling my eyes. I was very skeptical. But then as an adult, I read The Body Keeps the Score, something that my therapist recommended to me. And everyone was like, this is the book. You have to read this book. And I think at that point, I started to have like an understanding about how our body holds on to our feelings and our emotions, and that this mind-body connection is very real. And I'm only saying that as someone who read the book, should probably read it again. And I don't really do that much about it, which is probably what you're going to talk about. But that is like the only thing I know about mind-body, integration with our mental health and our physical health. So that's my journey. That's where I am.
It sounds like you, on the one hand, you merited to have a mother who was really into this and was able to raise you with the awareness of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the same time, sometimes when our mothers do stuff, we run the other way so fast and can't actually accept it because we don't want to go there.
Right. Because, my mother, I thought of my mother as like this hippy dippy product of the 60s and 70s. And I was like a Beis Yaakov girl, and it just didn't jive like my vision of what a Beis Yaakov girl should be thinking about. But like I said, as an adult, I really see like how pain is manifested through, the way emotionally where I'm holding. So, okay. So you that's what sort of inspired your journey. Now, you mentioned that, part of the healing process is having this mind-body connection. How do you get people to get in touch with that? Like, can you describe some ways that you're able to make your clients aware of that mind-body connection?
That's a good question. I would say actually that I think my clients usually come in already having some awareness of it. Like I don't have to educate them on it. There's something that happened in their lives that they've become aware of it, and they realize that other ways aren't working for them. And they're looking, they're craving, they're maybe desperate for something different, just like I was. And when they encounter this work, it's almost like a breath of fresh air. It's like, where's this been all along? Like, this is exactly what I've been looking for. I feel like I've been banging my head trying to do all kinds of other methods that are out there that haven't been working for me. And then they come across this and it's like, oh, I can finally breathe more easily and I can dip my feet into this. This is the direction I want to go in.
Right. So what does that look like? What does like somatic work look like? Because to me it's a very like esoteric concept. Like we like I don't know what this means, honestly. I know that makes me sound like really dumb, but
No, not at all.
I can't visualize it. Can you help me visualize what it is? I know on your website you discuss the various tools that you use. And so can you talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. So really somatics as a phrase, as a word, but if we can imagine it being part of a bigger, it's like an umbrella word, that contains a lot of other modalities within it. The word itself, somatics, was developed, I believe, by somebody named Thomas Hanna, who coined the term. Soma means body. And so somatics is really of the body. And he has his own methodology, Thomas Hanna, of how he works with the body. But really, any body-based methods are under the umbrella of somatics. People have started to use that word as a catch-all phrase for different modalities that include the body. The ones that I use specifically, the two main ones that I use, one being focusing and the second one being transforming touch, which these words are like, they so don't even do justice to the process. It's really interesting. Focusing itself was originally called the experiential method, which I think is a much better name, personally. And which essentially what it is it's a person bringing their awareness to the sensations within their body. So it's called the felt sense, F-E-L-T, felt sense. And inviting a felt sense to arise within them as it relates to whatever it is that they're grappling with in life, whether it's physical pain, whether it's a dilemma that they're encountering, whether it's a challenge they're having within themselves. And as they bring awareness to it within their body, something starts to form, which is called a felt sense. And so the person who developed the process of focusing, so he would invite his clients to bring their attention to this felt sense within their bodies. And then his clients would use the term, when I focus in on it. And so he decided to call it focusing. But a lot of people, you hear the word focusing and you think that it's more of like a cognitive.
Like a mindfulness.
Exactly. Yeah. Like really helping us not be distracted, let's say.
Right.
From all things. But really it's about focusing in on the sensations that we have in our bodies.
Right.
And
do people have to be 100% on board for this to work, like hypnosis, where, you can't be hypnotized if you're not willing? Do you have to be 100% on board with it?
That's an interesting question. I'm curious. I'm thinking out loud now. What would it look like if somebody wasn't on board? I mean, I've definitely worked with people who are not on board. And it's hard for them. I mean, what's interesting about it is that a felt sense is something that takes time to arise. Our brains work really, really quickly. We speak quickly. We think quickly, put things together very, very quickly. Our body speaks a much slower language. And it's a language that when we learn to listen to it, right, the felt sense is the language of the body. When we want to listen to the language of the body, we need to realize that it's a much slower language. It moves at a much, much slower pace. And so we need to have tremendous patience in order to be able to invite a felt sense and have patience for it to evolve, for it to develop. Because it could start off as something really small and almost insignificant. And as we give it time, 30 seconds, a minute, and then we stay with it even longer, watching it unfold and develop, it becomes something even bigger and more profound. And so we need patience in order to be able to do it. It's a very active process on the person who is experiencing within their body. So when I guide a client through it, I'm listening to the words that they're telling me. I might be getting a sense of the experience, but really so much of it is based on what they're experiencing within themselves that they're reflecting back to me. So it's in that sense, it's the client takes on a very active role. Whereas in hypnosis, it would be more the hypnotherapist that would be taking on the active role.
So, and of course, there's obviously like a trust here. Like they have to trust you to guide them through this process because there is a vulnerability associated with tapping into the things that maybe your mind might be blocking or hiding under as a coping mechanism. Like there's probably a lot of trust that you have to build. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, trust. Absolutely. Trust and the belief that the person who's listening to me is actually going to hold space for that and give the space and give the time and give the space. That's really the word that's coming to me, to create this space for the process to unfold. It's a slow process. And people, when they watch it and have no clue what's going on, they're like, what is taking so long? What is happening here?
Right, right. So yeah, I can just imagine that it's a, I mean, I don't know, but I think there's like a, you have to be brave to a large component to be willing. But again, there's that gift of desperation. But, you know, when in asking the terms of like people's willingness to participate, I actually, many years ago, I pinched my shoulder and I went to a massage therapist and she was giving me the massage. And for whatever reason, I was crying. I was, I was
Uh-huh.
basically sobbing like the entire time, not because I was in pain. She was like
Interesting.
she was releasing something within me. I was going through stuff. My mother had either just died or was
Oh,
dying. I don't remember exactly what the timeline was. And I said to her, I'm so sorry. Like I kept apologizing. Like, I'm so sorry that I'm crying. And she said to me, you would not believe how many people cry while they're getting a massage. And that makes me think that there is something to it and there is a component of it that might be involuntary.
sure. Yeah.
So that's one thing. But then now when you do this somatic practice, how do you feel that the client connects to to their soul? Like how do you feel like this practice really helps people get in touch with that?
It's a good question. One of my biggest passions as it relates to the work I do is to find the Torah sources that, I don't want to say back it up, but that show that this is nothing new. This is something that we've had in Judaism from the very beginning, that there's nothing new here, right? There's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
And to be able to find the sources that express what this is.
Right.
And
That's a
so,
passion of mine as well. So it's a good thing you're
mhm,
here.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And so there's this source that I came across in the Sifsei Chaim, of Chaim Friedlander, Mashgiach of Panovich, in like the 60s and 70s, I believe, where he talks about this idea of a person really slowing things down within them, slowing down their mind. And I'm like doing it right now as I'm speaking so that I can like really let this come through me. And taking some sort of question that they have, and instead of analyzing it and trying to figure out the solution, to kind of just let the question dangle, so to speak. Let it be there in the space of a person, but not to fixate on it in this desperate way to find the answer, to open themselves up to receive the answer. And he says that there's a moment that happens where all of a sudden, Hashem will pour his shafa into the person with the answer. And in that moment, a person achieves Dveikus. And when I read that, I thought, wow, this is such a profound concept, because it's not like our neshama is literally the pipeline through which we get our shafa from Hashem, through which we get the things in our lives that we need, right? Our neshama is a part of Hashem himself, and he gives us exactly what it is that we need through our neshamos. And so very often in the process of focusing, what happens is that there's some sort of struggle that a person has that they're grappling with. And so they'll slow things down. We go into the body. We start to notice what's there. We invite the felt sense to come and give us, start to speak its words, its way. And then after some amount of time, there's usually some sort of insight that comes. And sometimes these insights can seem small and insignificant, and sometimes they really feel like these big awarenesses, these aha moments that almost didn't exist within before. And it can really feel like this moment of Zveikus where Hashem just literally poured something into me, because there's something new, a new perspective that I have on life, a new awareness that I have of Hashem's closeness with me that I didn't know or couldn't have experienced before.
Right. So I actually, I'm thinking about something that I've heard many times, different clinicians or professionals say something along the lines of, or even rabbis say that we have the tools and the resources within ourselves to know the right thing to do. Hashem provides all that we need to overcome our obstacles and our nisyonos. And so when you tap into what you're describing sounds like when you tap into your inner resource and your neshama, and you say, what is it that I need? And you have a connection with your soul in a way that, answers the question for you. So I know, like in therapy, the therapist will say, well, what do you think you should do? And I'm always like, I don't want to, I sort of push back on it a little bit, but in essence, what she's saying is that you have the resources within you. And I know that I have some upcoming podcasters talking about some of these concepts of, understanding that all resources are within yourself. But I think this aspect of connecting to your Shama, which has the connection to Hashem, which has all the answers, if we just listen to it and we tap into it. I like that idea. I feel very much like that could be like both a scary and wondrous process.
Yeah, because it asks us to go to places that we don't already know. And when someone asks you a question, what do you think about this? Like, well, either I've already formulated my thought about this and I already know what I want to say about it, or you're asking me to come up with something new.
Right.
And that can be really scary. Like, I don't know. How am I supposed to answer that on the spot? I don't actually know the answer to this question. And what this allows us to do and is asking of us is to say, let's go beyond knowing. Even if I know, even if I have some sort of answer in mind, can I put that answer to the side and go inside and invite something new to come, something fresh, a different perspective that I haven't yet thought about?
Sounds like you want your clients to have a natural curiosity about what their neshama is trying to say to them, what Hashem is trying to say to them through this mind-body connection.
I would say that definitely curiosity is a critical ingredient to be able to get there. And I'll also say, just if I can even speak of my own experience, there are times, and this has been happening, is actually for the last few months, I think probably since the war broke out here up north. I live in the north of Israel. It's been really scary for me to go in my body. And there's a lot of stuff going on in there.
Yeah.
With everything, a lot of emotions, a lot of feelings, a lot of stuff. And
yes,
my initial reaction has been fear. As soon as I'm about to go inside, there's fear that comes up first. And when there's fear, there isn't curiosity. And so I actually have to first get curious about the fear and make space for the fear and allow that to be there. And then once I give that space, then it doesn't usually take long. A couple minutes, I'm giving space for the fear, allowing it to be there, and then the curiosity comes back. So yeah, it is important for there to be curiosity there. But if a person isn't curious, I would go to what's blocking the curiosity from coming. That would be my first step.
Right. So you also mentioned journaling with the dominant, non-dominant hands. And I'm curious to know what you have found that to do, how that has been helpful for people to use that practice, that tool.
So the non-dominant hand journaling is a really great way to try to access this other part of ourselves, the younger, more intuitive, more curious, more inquisitive part of ourselves. When we write with our dominant hand, we write what we already know. When we start to write with our other hand, so if you think about it, you naturally start to write slow. Your speed slows down because we're not used to writing with our other hand. And sometimes letters will come out upside down. We might spell things wrong. It's activating a part of ourselves, a part of our brain that doesn't rely as much on our cognitive thinking. And so what it does is it allows things to start to come out that we wouldn't otherwise have thought about. So I particularly love using it in groups where I can't necessarily guide each woman through the process of focusing. So this allows each woman on their own to kind of access a little bit. I don't think it goes as deep as focusing, but allows them to access a little bit of what's going on in their subconscious and bring things out from that place.
So interesting because, I've been learning a little bit about IFS, internal family systems, and it seems based on this, how you're explaining it to me, that it's almost like you're allowing, let's say an inner part of yourself that is, that you might be out of touch with.
Sure.
To sort of come through in a way and to say to give you some sort of message that either you have been suppressing or ignoring or whatever the case may be. It seems to me like you're that's sort of a practice of the internal family system modality.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So IFS is a modality to work with parts. It's one of the most popular ones that's out there, but it's definitely not the only modality that's out there. I personally don't use IFS specifically. I use different part work modalities that are out there. But yeah, if people know that more than they know other ones, then yeah, it's a way to be able to access our parts and be able to give them expression.
What's another modality that works with parts? I'm not familiar.
Oh, there's so many. So there's actually one of the main focusing teachers. So the person who created focusing is no longer alive, and he had students that he trained. So one of his students that he trained, her name is Ann Weiser Cornell, and she's been using the language of parts, I think even before Richard Schwartz created IFS. And she has a whole modality of how to use focusing with parts that she calls interrelationship focusing. So that's the main one that I use. And also then the non-dominant handwriting, that comes from Baccione, who does a lot of inner child work, a lot of parts work using non-dominant handwriting and drawing. And then there's so many more. Like those are just, we've named 3 so far, and there's lots out there.
That's where I always tell the people that I'm interviewing, like, there's a she'eno yodea l'shol. Like, I don't even know sometimes the question to ask because it's not my area of expertise. No, I'm just trying to learn and be curious about what other people are doing to find wellness, to find some relief from some of the struggles that we have, whether it be physical or mental, emotional, spiritual, whatever it may be. So, not that I don't know it, and I'll be curious to look into it a little bit more once we get off the podcast. But what would you say, like, the average person coming to you, what would you say is their number one obstacle in, like, overcoming any sort of obstacle towards getting the most out of their sessions with you?
Can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah. What would you say, like, the average person that comes to you, what would you say would be like an obstacle that prevents people from coming to you, like from overcoming or getting to a place where they might not be stuck, or where they're able to be in touch with the mind-body connection? Like, what might be an obstacle?
Good question. Also, I would say that in general, a lot of the women that come to work with me are women that had to be the good girl, and they had to be the obedient one, do what they were told, and they did it. They're very, very good girls. And what happens as a result of that is they tend to grow up with a very, very strong inner critic. And what this inner critic does in their lives is really beats them up every time they make a mistake. Right. So they had to work so hard to be the best. And so the inner critic will then come up and yell at them when they aren't the best, or even perceived as the best.
So the inner critic is the obstacle.
The inner critic is the obstacle. Yeah. Because anytime you want to try to get curious about what's going on within you, when you have a strong inner critic, then the inner critic can really take over, because the inner critic doesn't want to be curious. The inner critic just wants to judge and already define your fate, declare your fate long before you've had a chance to even explore what's going on inside. So a lot of the work that I do with my clients is around the inner critic.
So how do you help that?
So I'll contrast it with some other popular methods that are out there. A very popular method for working with the inner critic is to kind of tell it to get away. Like, okay, yeah, I hear you, now go. I get out of here. Like, I don't need you anymore. Or maybe yelling at the inner critic. A lot of that, like really emoting at the inner critic, putting it in its place, telling it, get out of here. You're not worth anything anymore. You've served your purpose. Leave me alone, kind of thing. And in my work, I really see that the way to work with the inner critic is actually to see the need behind the inner critic. The inner critic is here to serve a purpose. It's here because there's something that it is so petrified about that might happen to you in your life, that it has to act in this way in order to protect you.
Right. And
so if we can really turn to the inner critic with compassion and understanding, which is so hard to do when somebody's yelling at you.
Right.
It's really hard. But when we can really be with it with gentleness and with understanding, it starts to transform, and it starts to be less intense. I can't say an inner critic ever disappears altogether. All of Yetzer Hara, we're going to have one until the day we leave this world. So the moment we leave this world.
Right.
But it starts to quiet down in a way that it doesn't have the same hold on a person anymore.
Right.
Able to start to notice, okay, yeah, that's my inner critic again. Okay, there's judgment. Like all of these like mindfulness terms that we hear about, noticing our thoughts. Well, when an inner critic is like, I have this image coming to me of this thing smothering my face and squeezing my head so tight that I can't even separate from my thoughts. But it's so intense and so strong, how can I just notice my thoughts and let them go? But if I can start to work with my inner critic in a way where I can really realize, wow, my inner critic is so petrified of something happening to me, and I can be with it with compassion, it starts to, that kind of gives it a little bit of space for me as it starts to quiet down and gives me space to think and breathe again.
Right. I have heard of people thanking, their parts as part of like in IFS, where there's, let's say, somebody is aggressive because that's how they needed to survive or whatever. So rather than saying like that's a terrible quality and it alienates people and whatever, just sort of like basically telling it to leave you alone. And that's sort of like what you were discussing, that they say like, oh, thank you, like you've been very helpful until now, I just need some space. And sort of like I think that it's, in essence, what you're saying is to sort of appreciate the part for what it brought to the table when you needed it. And that's very different than, I think, maybe like the old school approach of like trying to eradicate all negative emotions.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So
I will say there's a nuance here that's specific to focusing that I haven't found in any other modality. And even with people who say that, oh, IFS is so similar to focusing, there's this nuance here that to me makes all the difference, and probably why I don't particularly like IFS.
Okay.
Because of this nuance. To me, this changed my life. This was like what was night and day for me from all other modalities that existed and focusing. Like it really put it on a completely different, totally different league for me. And that is, as you were describing that, like thanking your inner critic. So I think about myself and I think about my clients who haven't yet been able to sit with a sense long enough where we jump back into our cognition and are like, oh, I'm supposed to think this thing. Okay, thank you so much. But I don't actually believe it. And I'm not actually feeling it. Because that's just the next step that I'm supposed to do, but I'm not there. And with focusing, we don't run to, giving it over to anything or trying to resolve anything. We don't try to change what's going on. We trust that by being with it, something will start to shift. And so eventually I might come to the point where I might think my inner critic, that might come naturally from within, but I never try to force that process. I continue to sit with the sensations and be inquisitive and curious about the sensations that are coming up within me as it relates to my inner critic, and trust that through being with them, they're going to start to transform. Something will start to shift within me without me trying to do anything to them, without me trying to manipulate them in any way. That's by being with them, things will start to unfold, unravel, and start to shift over time. And so in this case, in this way, working with the inner critic, it's something that I would say is slower, definitely, than other modalities that are out there working with the inner critic. But in my experience, it's long lasting because our physiology is really changing. As we sit with these sensations, our system starts changing and starts having a different relationship with the sensations within it. Like it's literally changing our neural pathways in our brain as we sit with these sensations and start to show our brains that I can be with this inner critic and it's not going to suffocate me or paralyze me. I can be with it a little bit at a time, and that signals a lot of safety to our nervous systems. And as things start to settle down, that's when things start to shift. Not by forcing the change, but by little, being with it and allowing things to unravel and unfold.
That's beautiful because it reminds me of like when you tell a child to apologize
to
somebody, you're like, apologize. So then they're sorry. And then the other kid is like, they don't mean it.
Right. Exactly.
And you're like, well, what do you want from me? I could tell them to say, I'm sorry. I can't make them believe it, so that's what it sounds like a little bit, is where, making sure that, if I like that idea of not being disingenuous with yourself, even that that you're being genuine and you're saying, I think that this serves a purpose and I need to have some sort of acceptance around this. And it's very interesting, has given me a lot to think about.
Yeah. I would say just like one other thing about this that I think sometimes I can finish a focusing session, whether it's my own focusing session or if I'm guiding a client through something. And sometimes at the end of a session, there isn't this like beautiful like shift that happens that we're cognitively aware of. But there's a trust that happens. And I think that's what's so crucial. You talk about what needs to happen. Person has to really trust the body, has to really trust that something is happening. Even if I'm not cognitively aware of a shift that's happening, I trust that by being with this, something has changed within me. And that I'm a different person now than I was an hour ago when I started this. And that over time, I'll start to see the cumulative changes within me. And then every so often, I'll be like, whoa, this amazing shift that happens.
Right. So it's not a swinging of a pendulum.
Right.
It could possibly be more subtle than that.
Sure.
So, trying to honor your time and how much time we've spent together so far, I do have 2 final questions for you.
Sure.
One question is, can you tell me a time where there was a tremendous shift for one of your clients and where they gained a significant amount of release? Can you tell me sort of like a case study or a story about something like that?
I could say in general, I don't want to go into the specifics of clients' lives.
Yeah, of course.
But I could say in general that different clients have managed to accomplish things in their lives that they previously weren't able to accomplish. Things like achieving pregnancy, things like getting married, things like finally getting a get, things like being able to move on from certain traumas that they've had in their lives that they just were not able to move on from for so long.
Right. It sounds amazing, honestly. I guess my final question to you is, if you could let, the listeners know, one thing to start, either paying attention to or to sort of begin becoming more aware of the mind-body connection, what would be a takeaway that you would want people to have from this conversation?
The one thing that's coming up for me is to look for the freshness in a situation. So often when we do this work, what can be so frustrating about it is when we feel like we're doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. And then we start to get discouraged, we start to despair when things don't shift, when we aren't seeing the actual changes in our lives, because we believe in this, but I've been doing this work for so long and things aren't really changing. Things are really exactly the same. And this is something that focusing asks of us, is to find the freshness in this. If I can look at this with brand new eyes, as if I'm seeing this for the very, very first time, what's one tiny little new aspect of this that I could focus in on? And when I can find that one fresh thing, I'll give you an example. So let's say somebody, every time they go into their body, there's always a tightness in their chest. And it's always the same thing over and over again. It's always the same, always the same, always the same. It gets boring after a while. It's always the same thing. And they're not making progress. They're not moving forward. So the question I would invite them to be with is, what is different? Even in the slightest way. Maybe it's the tiniest a little bit smaller, tiniest a little bit bigger, the tiniest bit softer, the tiniest bit harder. Really just finding one little aspect of this tightness in your chest that's different from how it's been up until now. Looking at it with fresh eyes. Now, when we can look at it with fresh eyes like that, that awakens our curiosity. It also shows trust in the process. And then really something starts to shift from that place. And we can continue to be with it from that place of freshness.
That's fantastic. Thank you. This has been a super interesting conversation, bringing me back to my good old days with Louisa Hay, but now understanding it from a more like this modality that really I don't think a lot of people know about
Right.
or really understand. And I'm not arrogant enough to think that my podcast is going to now clarify everything for people in their minds. But I know for myself that, as I was coming into this interview, I was thinking to myself, I don't get it. Like, I don't really know what she's talking about. And I even
join the club.
I even Googled it again before, even though I had done some research before, coming to this interview a while ago when we spoke last, I said, what is this again? What am I doing? So, this conversation has really been very eye-opening and sort of putting together some of the different things that I already know or have learned over the years.
Yeah.
And there is basically what it sounds like is there is hope out there. There are different modalities, but that this could be something that people, if they're stuck in a place where they might really seriously consider this. And I hope it gives my listeners some more information. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Can I share a quick story on this?
Pardon me?
Can I share a quick story?
Yeah, I'd love it.
Okay, so for years, not an exaggeration, for years, I had been doing this thing with my clients and I had no clue what it was. And I would Google it, trying to find what it was because I wanted to train in this thing that I was doing with them. And I saw that it was working, but I had no clue what it was. And I kept trying to Google all kinds of different ways to try to figure out what this thing was that I was doing. And I didn't get anywhere. And so one time I was working with a new client, and at the end of our first session together, she says to me, "I didn't know you did focusing." This is my first time hearing this word. And I thought she was saying that I was so focused in our session, which is like kind of so insulting. Like, what do you mean I'm like so focused? Like, duh, like, isn't that how I should be as a practitioner here?
Uh-huh.
So she said, no, that thing that we did with my throat where you asked me to stay with it, that's called focusing. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh my goodness, this thing has a name and it's the weirdest name ever. It doesn't even make sense, but okay, wow, now I have a direction to go in. Right. That's what introduced me to focusing itself and allowed me to then research it and train in it and go on the path that I had intuitively known for so many years, but had no clue what it was called.
Right. I imagine that that we've all been there at that place where we're doing something, but we don't know why we're doing it, whether it's like a min hug or whether it's some coping skill, we don't know. And then somebody finally brings it up. And that's where you're like, oh,
yeah.
That is very funny. Thank you for sharing that with us. Okay, I'll let you go. Thank you so much. And
thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye. Views expressed by me, your host, and my delightful guest are not necessarily reflective of each other's views, ideas, or life choices. Sometimes we're on the same page, and other times we're not. Views expressed by me, your host, and my delightful guest are not necessarily reflective of each other's views, ideas, or life choices. Sometimes we're on the same page, and other times we're not.